You're listening to part 2, an interview with the second place winner of the Catholic University Center for Human Rights annual Human Rights Essay Contest by William Saunders, Director of the Center for Human Rights. To read the award-winning essays, go to humanrights.catholic.edu.
Tell your representatives, and by that, and actually I want to lead into something I want you to talk about, Peter, but so you have rights as a citizen. Of course, you have rights to vote in national elections. You also have rights to vote in state elections. And so your representatives have to respond to you. I mean, don't be cynical. If there are enough people like you in their jurisdiction, their district, they will respond to you because they want to be reelected. And if you make them embarrassed because you ask them to do something and they refuse to do it, and then they're running for reelection and you make that public, they're not going to like it. It's just enlightened self-interest. So you do have a lot of power. So just say a word about what might be being done at the state level, at the federal and the state level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Politicians ultimately have to answer to their constituents, which are the voters. But yeah, as I talked about in my essay, back in the spring of 2023, the U.S. Congress passed a bill on the forced organ harvesting in China. And so that applied not only sanctions, but it also basically it forces the State Department to actually report annually on this issue. And so that's basically what's going on at the federal level, and that passed by an overwhelming majority in the House, and so it ultimately awaits the Senate. But what's happening?
So I just want to. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just if you're listening, if that sounds like a good idea, it sounds like a good idea to me to have this bill that would require the State Department to focus on it and report about it and to raise the issue, and it's passed the House. And wherever you live, you have a senator. In fact, you got two. Write them, tell them, because this shouldn't be a partisan issue. I mean, every Democrat and every Republican should be against forced organ harvesting of unwilling people. So there's something you can do right there. Tell your senators to support this, and ask or demand. I mean, they work for you. Demand for them to tell you why they're not doing it if they're not. Okay, Peter, go ahead.
No, I completely agree, because this passed overwhelmingly in the House, and so I definitely encourage you to call your U.S. senators and really force a Senate vote on this on the floor and really get this passed, because there's no need for a delay. And then, of course, there's different state legislatures that are working on different bills on this issue. For instance, I mentioned in my essay that Texas signed one that prohibits health benefit plan issuers from covering human organ transplants that are performed in China. And so many other states like Arizona and Missouri and Illinois are also basically modeling off of that Texas bill that was signed into law recently. Because what often happens is, like, for instance, there might be like some kind of tourist or that American tourists that go into China, and so they ultimately have like an organ failure or something, and basically it forces those health insurance agencies for not allowing Chinese organs to be used and covered.
Because the idea is there might be these immorally harvested organs that are being used.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great example for anybody listening. That's one state, that's Texas. And Peter talks about there are other states that are considering these. So wherever you live, if you live in Maryland, you live in Virginia, you live in New York or California or Pennsylvania or Wyoming, they all have state legislatures. They all have companies that want to do business in those states. They all have health insurers who are active in those states, trying to make money. So state legislatures regulate insurances. health insurance just like the national government does. So raise the issue with your representatives. Tell them this is important to you. I mean, these legislatures, people in government exist for only one reason, and that is to do the will of the people. So tell them what it is you want. Anything else, Peter, you want to say about either your essay or this subject?
Yeah. What I would say is ultimately, people often, maybe critique like, oh, you're making a, mound out of an anthill. Like, why should we care about something, halfway across the world? Like, we got our own fair share of problems. And I mean, people often raise that nowadays. And I would say to that, this is one of the most important questions that we face. Not only is it just about, people being persecuted halfway across the world, more importantly, it's about the bigger questions of, do we have human dignity? Do we have human rights? And it ultimately, it's about our own identity as Americans. Do we subscribe to the things that we say we subscribe to, like the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence? Like, should we care and protect all people? Is there equality? Is there compassion in this world? Like, should we care for our neighbor, or should we only care for ourselves? And so I think these big questions, these abstract questions, really get into the practical, everyday life when it comes to human rights and those being trampled on in China. So I think this is actually one of the most important matters that we should face.
Yeah, human rights are for human beings. That's why they're called human rights. So that means every human being has these human rights. As anybody, if you listen to the Barefoot Lawyer podcast, you realize that what happens in China is very relevant for what happens here, because a government that does this kind of barbaric organ harvesting from living people is a threat to its own citizens. But as we discuss on the Barefoot Lawyer, it's a threat to the United States, and as Guangcheng says, countries that believe in the rule of law and universal values. So human rights are universal. So we should obviously care, like Peter said, because these are human beings, and we should care because a government that does this is a threat and has proven itself to be a threat to the United States as well. So, Peter, thank you very much for the essay. Thank you for joining us on the Barefoot Lawyer podcast. And I invite the listener to come back for the next edition of the Barefoot Lawyer podcast.
The Catholic University of America's Center for Human Rights has published a documentary on the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The documentary features world-class human rights experts, from former State Department officials to ambassadors and human rights activists. It can be found on our website at humanrights.catholic.edu.